Welcome and thank you for being here. My name is David O'Neill. I'm the director of the Bishop Center for Ethical Leadership at the University of South Florida's Muma College of Business. Thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us as we explore trust and vaccines. Our mission at the Bishop Center is to promote the study and practice of ethical leadership. We primarily use trust as a lens for doing that. We call it trust-centered ethical leadership. As a leadership center, we recognize the implications and challenges for leaders who are handling the sensitivities around the issue of COVID vaccination. For example, many businesses are wrestling with putting together return to work plans while half of the country is still not vaccinated. When is the right time to bring people back? What if some employees are not vaccinated? As a business leader, can you require employees get the vaccine? Should you? Likewise, community leaders are faced with the reality that the pandemic has disproportionately affected racial and ethnic minority groups, with higher rates of death, hospitalization, and unemployment due to COVID in communities of color. What can be done about this? What is being done? With help from today's interview panelists, we'll look at how factors related to trust might be impacting vaccine uptake and what their organizations are doing to help people make informed decisions for themselves about the COVID vaccines. First, let's start with a little bit of context. These are the latest statistics from the Washington Post tracker and the Kaiser Family Foundation. Right now, there are in our country of the 332 million people, 280 million people are eligible to get the vaccine. In other words, they're 12 years in age or older. Of that 280 million, 66% are already vaccinated or are planning to do so as soon as possible. That leaves 12% who want to wait and see, 7% who will only get vaccinated if they're required to, and 13% who definitely do not want to get the vaccine. That's approximately 108 million people who are vaccine hesitant. Today, we're interested in gaining a better understanding of what is demotivating the groups in the green box and what the structural barriers may be preventing the 4% who are motivated to get the vaccine, but who have not yet done so. First, I'd like to get a better understanding of the audience that we have here today. We've put together an anonymous single question survey that is pinned in the chat. If you would, please click on the link now and respond. The survey platform does not connect your name to your response, and so we will have no way of knowing who has responded what. But by responding, you're helping us be able to tailor the talk in a way that is most beneficial to you, the audience. Of course, you're not required to respond, but we hope you will. Trust us and do so. One last housekeeping note, and then I'll bring in our guests. We are taking audience questions. We received several questions through the registration form, and those will be incorporated in the second part of our interview. If you did not submit a question and would like to, please put it into the chat, and our producer team will select a few for us to ask our guests during the second part of the interview today. Okay, let me bring in our guests. First, we have Dr. Kevin Sneed. He is the Senior Vice President of USF Health and the founding director of the USF Taneja College of Pharmacy. He holds a degree in biology with a concentration in microbiology and a doctorate in pharmacy. He has tremendous experience in both clinical settings and in the development of initiatives that help address healthcare disparities, such as the We Care initiative. Dr. Sneed, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here with you, all of you today.
Wonderful. Aaron Shirachman is the Executive Director of Politifact, based at the Poynter Institute for Media Studies in St. Petersburg, Florida, and oversees Poynter's MediaWise initiative, which aims to empower people of all ages to be more critical consumers of online content. Mr. Shirachman, welcome.
It is great to be with you. I'm very excited to be here.
Dr. Sneed, let me start with you. Tell us what you're doing through the USF College of Pharmacy the We Care initiative in partnership with ReachUp, and how your unique background comes into play.
And David, thank you very much for that question. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us all here this morning. So what I'm doing through We Care, and We Care is actually an acronym that stands for the Work Group Enhancing Community Advocacy and Research Engagement. And the whole idea behind We Care, which emanated from a NIH health disparities grant that we had several years ago, was really to begin to communicate more effectively with marginalized communities, underrepresented communities, to increase the number of people that will be willing to participate in clinical research. So we've had the initiative going on long before the pandemic hit. It's very important to understand that we went on a journey and we partnered with a community nonprofit group known as ReachUp Incorporated. It was very critical that we form that relationship with them because even though we have a scientific background, we still had not immersed into the community from a standpoint of trust. But on the other hand, ReachUp Incorporated, they did have an enormous amount of community trust, and they really have helped to usher us into community conversations. So we, through partnership with ReachUp, we've held now over 80 separate and unique community engagement activities. And all of it centered around educating people about COVID-19, the dangers of COVID-19, and then the therapeutics involved with COVID-19, and more specifically, the vaccines. But more importantly, we answered all of the questions that people had about COVID-19, and we did it one-on-one, we did it in community groups, we did it with church groups, just to make sure that people had a level of comfort around that they got their question answered in a very evidence-based manner from someone that has a background and is here for their interests. And so, again, my background in microbiology and immunology really allowed me to come up to speed fairly quickly about COVID-19 and understand it in a way, but as a professor, translate it in a way that people can understand in the community.
Great. And are you continuing to offer these talks around the community through We Care?
Yes, we are. We are continuing to do those around the community. I think we have one coming up, I believe, on the 24th. And it's really important to understand the engagement with the community and the level of how we even got to that point. It's not me setting up the engagement. We're not using a USF platform. Everything has been done through ReachUp Incorporated.
Right.
We use their Zoom platform, and we use contacts that they have with the community, and we encourage the community to contact them if indeed they want We Care, myself and my We Care partners to come and provide the community presentations.
Right. So you all bring the scientific credibility, and they bring the relationships with the community. Wonderful. Mr. Sharachman, tell us what Pointer is doing through Politifact and the MediaWise project.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with you all, and I apologize. I'm in a public space, so it might be a little bit of background noise. But Politifact is the nation's leading political fact-checking organization. We've been working since 2007 to fact-check claims about complicated topics. That's political policy, healthcare, viral misinformation, and really, obviously, since February of last year. We have taken a important step to try to answer as many questions about COVID-19 and the coronavirus vaccine as possible. To date, we have fact-checked more than 800 specific claims. A lot of these are claims that come from readers, people who come to our site wondering what's true and what's not about the coronavirus. We're a completely nonpartisan website where our only mission is to help people understand the facts of very complicated issues. Right. And we try to be as transparent as possible throughout that process. In addition, we run a media literacy initiative called MediaWise, which is the concept of which is as a fact checker, Politifact has 15 professional fact checkers. And we are the largest political fact-checking website in the United States. But obviously, there is so much more misinformation and disinformation about COVID-19 than we could possibly fact check. So we are working to teach people, anyone, how to be their own fact checkers online, to think critically and skeptically about what they see with some basic fundamental tools, so that they can be better consumers of their own information that they see online. We have taught and reached more than 1 million people in the United States over the past year, teaching basic media literacy and critical thinking skills. Great.
If you in the audience are interested in tapping into these resources, stick around to the end and we'll let you know how to do that. Now let me turn now to a paper that was put together by Dr. Noel Brewer at the University of North Carolina School of Public Health. In that article, he synthesized the available research as it relates, generally speaking, to vaccine uptake. He outlined 3 categories of interventions that are discussed in the research, and his model has been adopted by the World Health Organization. Very quickly, the 3 categories of interventions that he synthesized. The first is what people think and feel. For example, is the COVID-19 disease serious? Are the vaccines safe and effective? The second category was how social processes and our networks may be influencing what people think and feel. And then the third are how incentives or requirements impact our actual behavior. Dr. Sneed, I'm interested in exploring first what people think and feel. Can you tell me, why have public leaders treated COVID differently than other viruses, like the flu, for example?
One of the big things that we need all the people to understand, and when I talk with the community, I really help people understand in the medical community and the scientific community, once we identify a harm, and it almost doesn't matter what that harm is, we're going to do anything and everything we can to mitigate that harm, study the harm, and then really begin to put policies and procedures in place that will protect the public. Very often, again, in the community, I talk about the notion of civilization and society. And we have responsibility to try and do everything we can to maintain both. And so when SARS-CoV-2 emerged late in 2019, and then, of course, when it really became more prevalent here in the United States, we were taking notice of the fact that, number one, it was a far different type of respiratory virus than anything we had ever seen before. When we understood how expansive and all the different areas of the body that this particular virus can attack, far above and beyond anything around just the respiratory organs, the lungs and the nasal pharynx, we really had to take much more notice and then do more to try and, number one, study it, and then number two, protect the public. And so the notion that we're dealing with another type of flu in the scientific and clinical community, we understood very quickly, as a matter of fact, that we were not dealing with that, and we were dealing with a virus that had the potential to activate portions of the immune system in the body, and more specifically, the inflammatory systems in the body, to cause a great deal of organ harm to the person that's been infected. And so I think that kind of answers the question of why we took a much different approach beyond the flu.
Absolutely.
The short answer, it was already proven to be far more dangerous than any respiratory virus that we had encountered for this number of people in the pandemic around the world.
Yeah. So let me ask you about the vaccines, Dr. Sneed. Do you trust the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines, and why should others be so confident?
Actually, I do trust the vaccines, and I'll tell you why. Again, I think we have not done a very good job of messaging to the public exactly how long we've been working on these particular vaccine platforms. Many people kind of woke up and felt that we walked into a kitchen on April of 2020 and began making a brand new type of vaccine platform. And nothing could be further from the truth. As a matter of fact, one of the companies that's now continuing work actually started work on these messenger RNA vaccine platforms back in 2001. During the original SARS-CoV-1, or the original SARS, there were groups that continued doing work since 2005 all the way up until now. And also, a lot of the research has actually kind of evolved from work we've already been doing in cancer research. So there have been numerous and almost countless numbers of clinical trials and clinical research for over a 15 to 20-year period around the current vaccines that we're using, but I'm not sure that we message that appropriately to the public.
Right.
And so I have a much greater confidence in terms of what they can do for the body, how they work in the body, and really how safe they are for human beings to be able to take them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you've pinpointed that people may be skeptical at the speed with which the vaccines were developed, but what you're telling us is a lot of the foundational work had already happened. Mr. Shirachman, let me bring you into the conversation. What are the fundamental lines of misinformation and disinformation as it relates to COVID, and how are those being spread?
So I would say we have seen a lot of misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll be honest, when we started more than a year ago, we had hoped that a public health crisis like this one would not necessarily get political. A lot of the work we do is fact check very political topics. And we actually saw this as an opportunity for Americans and really people of the world to unite around a basic understanding of facts and work towards a common good. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And very quickly, the pandemic itself became a topic of misinformation, right? We all know the lines of misinformation and the problems that started around, first, fake cures, how the coronavirus could be cured. Second, the wearing of masks and the efficacy of wearing or not wearing masks. And now clearly, there are lots of lines of misinformation related to the vaccine. They are not by themselves fundamentally new or different. A lot of them start with a basic concept that there are a few people in the world that have mass control over everything that we do. This kind of generally described as this deep state, but really a cabal of people who, based on their power and wealth, can basically design systems for the whole world to follow. And so this is, in this line, we're talking about Bill Gates, we're talking about Anthony Fauci, we're talking about other people who have access to lots of resources and wealth, right? And it builds into this narrative that there are a few people who are out there to get us as citizens, and that we must defend our individual rights. But in most cases, in frankly all cases, as you peel back the layers of the onion of the truth and the facts, you find that all of these conspiracies are built on a foundational lack of evidence, right? So most recently, the conversations are around magnets that are in the vaccine. This is not true. You can test this yourself. I guess put a magnet next to your arm, see if it works. We are seeing people who are, frankly, in my opinion, profiting off of vaccine misinformation in a way that is dangerous, unhealthy, and something that we should all be aware of. I will end this kind of section with this, is that it is natural for us all to be skeptical naturally of anything, right? And I'm glad we are, right? What we fail from as society, we are skeptical about things that we do not believe, right? So if you believe the world is round, as we all do, any information you see online that says, no, the world is flat, you're going to be skeptical of it. You're going to be critical and think, well, who's saying that? What's the source of that information? We do not have the same levels of natural skepticism when we see something that confirms our world belief. So, for instance, if you're a person who believes that vaccines can cause autism, if you see any information online that supports that conclusion, you are more likely to believe it. You are not likely to be skeptical of it. And that is a failing of our brains and the way our brains work. Because if we had the same level of skepticism in both ways, I think we'd be much better positioned to kind of fight back against these misinformation attacks.
Yeah, and you're of course talking about confirmation bias, and I'm curious, Dr. Sneed, which of, if any, of these myths or misinformation lines are you hearing from the communities that We Care serves, and what have you found, or what are the relevant facts that you want to bring to bear today?
I think many of the well, first of all, let me go back just for a moment. I've been giving community presentations now since May of last year. Long before there was a vaccine, we were just really educating people about COVID-19. And even from the very beginning, there were people that just did not flat out believe there was even a COVID-19 virus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from the very beginning. So I have watched the entire evolution of misinformation and a lack of understanding and really disbelief, if you will, all the way from not believing that it even exists, all the way to more recently the madness. You know, we've heard about the RFID chips. We've heard about the you know, I did a presentation for a group of clinicians from Africa, Nigeria, Africa. You know, that it was going to alter your DNA. I mean, I've heard all of them. I've had people send me YouTube videos, Facebook posts. And so when you really put all of it together, I think Aaron was exactly spot on. Most of the presentations, even from people who appeared to be credible, people that had credentials, people that were physicians, people that were nurse practitioners, people that were other components, very often either they have purposefully or even unwittingly left out very key parts of information, either because they wanted to leave it out or they just themselves did not have the background to even understand or know where to find the information. And so it's almost too expansive to go into, other than the fact that we've watched this evolution of misinformation, we've watched an evolution of people just not truly understanding. And everything that we try to do is meet people where they are and then provide them with the evidence to give them something alternative to their reality to think about. And with that is concrete, that is facts that they can actually go and look at in a very tangible fashion to either add to the information that was missing or undo the misinformation that were provided.
Right. The majority of our audience today is from the community, both business leaders and public leaders. Dr. Sneed, are you aware of any existing incentive programs or requirements that you could tell them about that may help?
Oh, absolutely. And just in all disclosure, I'm not directly aware of any directly here in the Tampa Bay area, but we're watching them kind of unroll all across the entire country right now. All the way from, of course, the $1 million giveaway that we've seen multiple people get, to you know, now you can go different locations and if you show proof of vaccination, they'll give you a free beer, free donuts. I think I heard recently that Krispy Kreme has given out 1.5 million donuts across the entire country, free donuts for people that have vaccines, have vaccine cards. So we're watching people be incentivized in a lot of different ways. Well, I think what we're finding overall is that this is working for people that were on the fence. People that needed, you know, they were kind of leaning one way or the other, and they needed a little bit of an incentivized push to receive the vaccine. Where it is not apparently working for many people that are staunchly against the vaccine, and that can still remain concerning for many of us right now in the medical and scientific community overall.
Right.
Because we want people to get vaccinated, but yes, we are watching incentive programs unfold, and I've been a big fan of it. I'll be very candid with you. Months ago, when some of the vaccines came out, I said, hey, you know, maybe we should go over and have a vaccine drive over at Jackson's on the Harbor, and and you know, one of my colleagues said, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Don't think, you know, that'll never work. And now we're watching it work all over the country. But it really was trying to meet people where they are and give people an opportunity really to hear more and then receive the vaccine.
Right. Yeah, the conclusion that Dr. Brewer drew in his article was that interventions like that, the incentives and the sanctions, were the most effective or supported by the experimental research evidence, but that the work to influence people through social processes and initiatives like you're engaged in helps sort of lay the foundation, and you can build on that foundation to actually get people to get the vaccine. Let's shift to the issue of inequity and inequality as it relates to COVID. The data shows, and this data comes from National Institute of Health, as well as a study by ABC News. Hospitalization rates are 5 times higher for communities of color than white persons, 4 times higher for Hispanic and Latino communities. Billing data for COVID-19 testing from several states shows that African Americans experiencing fever and cough were less likely than white individuals to receive testing for COVID-19. The ABC study found that white people who have gotten at least one vaccine, the percentage of those folks was 1.5 times higher than the rate for blacks and Hispanics. While at the same time, white people are actually more vaccine hesitant. So that counters a common narrative used to explain away the discrepancy between white communities and non-white communities in terms of their vaccination rates. So Dr. Sneed, is access an issue? And if so, what are the specific structural barriers that you're seeing?
Well, access can be an issue across a spectrum of different areas. So what do I mean by that? Number one, early on when we had very limited supply, I think access to the vaccine was a very, very significant issue, to be perfectly honest. If you take communities of color, whether it be African American, Hispanic, or otherwise, we weren't finding access points for vaccination at the same rate that we were finding in other areas. That's number one. Number two, transportation to a given area was an issue for many people because they were not along common lines for public transportation or transport. And so over time, what we have witnessed now is that we have, you can now within probably 2 to 5 miles of most people, there is access to a vaccine if you want it. And that took time to kind of accomplish that, but now you can go into many local pharmacies and you can get that vaccine. They had pop-up clinics that were occurring in multiple areas, even in rural areas. And so I think the access issue has become less of an issue at this current moment, but we also have to keep in mind that during that time period, the access issue was a particular problem during the height of the most current wave that we had as well. And it's only been through vaccination during and in the immediate aftermath of that wave that we've been able to watch the plummeting rates of infectivity that we have found. So I think overall, we're probably going to find that when we do a postmortem, that there was greater harm to communities of color. And one more point, according to the stats that you had a moment, I'll just make very quickly. Just the whole idea that African Americans are now more willing to receive the vaccine is a direct reflection, and this is through my own communication with communities all over the country, to be honest, that we have now witnessed the number of people that either died in their family or people in their direct communities that have died or have had very terrible outcomes. And they themselves now understand that there's a little bit more opportunity. And those individuals came back and said, I would not want to, I don't want any of you to go through what I'm going through, either because I had a family member die or I myself am dealing with long COVID issues. And so please don't go through this, go get vaccinated.
Right.
And that was happening at a much higher rate now in many of our communities of color around the country, which begins to explain a little bit, maybe not totally, but a little bit of the shift that we're finding, because now the actual patient or the actual experience is coming from the people that lived it.
Right. Well, thank you for that context. Mr. Shirachman, welcome back. I'm curious if misinformation contributes to issues of access around the country. Or conversely, or related tangentially, are there existing misinformation campaigns that specifically target communities of color?
So I would answer this a couple ways. I would say that we have to acknowledge that the history of public health has not always done communities of color well. And so it is logical for African Americans, for instance, to be skeptical at a higher rate because our history shows that they should be skeptical. And, you know, we don't, this is interesting. I looked this up. This is not necessarily a decades old problem or a world war or a Tuskegee problem. There was a pharmaceutical company in France that was trying to test drugs on Africans because they figured that Africans are desperate for any cure that will be sent to them. So I want to acknowledge that I think it is okay for certain communities who have been neglected, who have been essentially preyed upon, to be more skeptical. And I think they should ask tough questions. I think as a health community, we need to have good answers. And I know this is part of this session is to do that, and making sure arming the medical community with a lot of good information is really important. I think one of the things that we kind of failed at, frankly, is in the early days of the pandemic, we did not signal enough that we don't know a lot about this virus. And so medical thinking might change. And I don't think we spent enough time thinking about how we communicate that to everyday Americans, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is you're asking about how misinformation spreads, and does it spread directly to communities of color? Not really. We don't see specific misinformation campaigns that are out to target a specific type of person. But what we do see, obviously, are campaigns that will resonate within particular communities, right? So, you know, it's the way this seems to work is that the people who are hesitant are people who are hesitant because they know others who are hesitant. And there is this phenomenon called a passive news consumer. So this is not a person who's watching CNN or reading Fox News or whatever. They're not reading the Tampa Bay Times every day. Where they're getting their news and information from is Facebook. And they're not even necessarily clicking on links, right? They're scrolling through headlines, they're seeing headlines, and they're subtly and mainly subconsciously picking up thoughts about the virus, right? They're not investigating them, and they're assuming maybe they're true. And this is a problem with social media platforms. Social media platforms are not built, they're not designed to highlight trustworthy information. They were built to keep you on their website. Let's be honest. Facebook.com was created with the idea that we want you to stay on Facebook.com. So if you like pictures of cats and dogs, you will see pictures of cats and dogs. If you are a person who is skeptical about the government, you will see posts that confirm that belief. It doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's false. But what it does mean is it's not been vetted for trust. And so you put that scenario, what social media companies are trying to do, you layer on kind of a natural skepticism and this idea of being a passive news consumer, meaning you're not reading journals, you're not watching the Dr. Anthony Fauci press conference, and you could easily see how people can get confused into thinking maybe the vaccine does something that it doesn't, or that it is too new or developed too quickly, because they don't have the time to dig in and find the true answers.
All right. Dr. Snee, did you want to react to any of that? I want to then move us to some audience Q&A.
Yeah, I'd love to get to the Q&A. I'll just be very quick. I think I agree with the overwhelming majority of what Mr. Shirachman mentioned. The only thing I think I would add on to it is that, you know, especially here in our country, we clearly have to acknowledge almost the societal conditioning that many people have experienced for many, many decades now, probably extending beyond a total of a century. And so if you were having mistrust of a system beforehand, and then the pandemic comes along, and then you have on your phone a Facebook platform, well, that social conditioning of having mistrust of whether it be the government, healthcare in general, clinical trials, or whatever it might be, that has now been reinforced in a way that is probably not in your best interest when we're dealing with a pandemic. And so I think I agree with him completely, but there were underlying causes long before the pandemic occurred that have really been enhanced and magnified to an extent that we really have to begin to work harder to unfold. And really health inequities and health disparities have existed for a long time in our country, whether it be access. We have multiple and countless studies of if you had a Caucasian person and a white person go to the very same provider with the very same conditions, you have very disparate outcomes in terms of treatment,
Right.
of treatments that were provided, options that were given to them. And so, and these studies have been done for a very, very, very long time. And so, yes, I agree with him completely in terms of the role of social media, but we also have to acknowledge really just the systemic mistrust that existed long before for very, very, very good and solid reasons that we now have to try really hard to correct.
Right, right. So social media is simply taking advantage of the mistrust or being a vehicle for that mistrust to be amplified.
Yes.
Great. Let me shift us into some audience Q&A, and let me bring us back to the question of the safety and efficacy of the vaccines, Dr. Sneed. We got several audience questions related to particular conditions, autoimmune disorders, diabetes, primary biliary cirrhosis. I'm not necessarily asking you to comment on each particular, but did the clinical trials for the vaccines, including that 15 to 20 years prior where the technology for the vaccines was being developed, did that include people who had underlying conditions?
Yeah, in the direct clinical trials, there were a number of people, especially with chronic conditions. So we're talking diabetes, high blood pressure, asthma, things along those natures, where they were included and evaluated as part of the clinical trials. People with HIV were not excluded from many of the clinical trials that were done. And now, when it comes to immunocompromised individuals, we didn't find many of those individuals in the clinical trials in terms of them being reported as a cohort group. Which, and I've read all the clinical trials, by the way, everything submitted to the FDA, and these people were put into cohort groups. We didn't find that, but I want to encourage people here that are watching to know that research gathering of information has never ceased. And so now for people who were immunocompromised and have these other conditions, and as we continue to learn more about the effect of the virus on various organ systems in the body, pregnancy, fertility, all these different components, now that the vaccine has been provided to now hundreds of millions of people, we're fine, and we're collecting data on all of that. Mm-hmm. And so for people that are immunocompromised, we have found that, yes, whether it be through natural means or medication-induced, immunocompromised systems, that they may have it may not be harmful to the individual, but they may not have the ability to build up the antibodies at the level of the same type of protection as people around them. And that's for that individual's provider, whether it be a rheumatologist, an OBGYN, or other people, to understand that and then have a contingency plan ready for those individuals if they indeed become infected. So I think it's really important to understand that while they were not studied as part of the quote unquote clinical trial, we have never stopped collecting information on every patient that has been provided the opportunity to get a vaccine.
Gotcha. And I want to make sure I'm understanding what you said there. So folks with autoimmune issues should still get the vaccine or shouldn't?
Yes, it's been recommended from rheumatological associations all around the world that people should get the vaccine. But we also have to acknowledge, and a very key paper came out, I believe, in New England Journal of Medicine. I had a chance to read not too long ago, and David, I'll share with you. I read well over 450 peer-reviewed articles, and that's an honest number, over an almost 18-month period now. That paper did indicate that if you were on certain medications to treat some of these conditions, that you may be at risk for not being able to develop the very same type of immune response. And so, but it doesn't mean that we were excluding and telling people not to get the vaccine.
Right. And from Dr. Brewer's article, the one I referenced earlier, his suggestion was the best advice for folks like that is to talk to your primary care doctor about your concerns related to the vaccine.
Most physicians around the world have said, we want you to get vaccinated. I mean, that's been an overwhelming response. There's very few cases where we tell people not to get vaccinated. There are a few. There may be a few providers, but we have overwhelmingly found from every association out there that they still want them to get vaccinated.
Yeah. I have another question for you, Dr. Sneed, and then I'll come back to you, Mr. Shirachman. Dr. Sneed, what about the variants that are arising, and what about cases where vaccinated folks are coming back positive with COVID? What's your reaction?
Yeah, I'm getting this question, and actually I'm dealing with it clinically, even as we speak right now with some of my own patients in our Department of Family Medicine. One thing I can share with you right now, number one, the current vaccines, especially the mRNA, they have been designed to match up genetically as close to that spike protein as possible. And so when these variants are coming out, even though the variants are showing these mutations, as of right now, the vaccines are holding up very well because they have been designed to attach onto multiple locations on that spike protein. And they may not match up now 100% the way they did a year ago, but they're still matching up very well to be able to protect people. And so we want people to get vaccinated. That's number one. Number two, for people that were vaccinated but now are having breakthrough infections, there are two parts. Number one, there's a difference between infection and disease. Because even if you're vaccinated, it doesn't mean that you're not going to come into contact with the virus. And for the overwhelming majority of vaccinated individuals, if we go and if we're looking for it and we detect either the RNA strand or if we detect the protein on that swab, then it's going to show positive. But it doesn't mean that you have been diseased. It doesn't mean that you're going to be at risk for developing symptoms. It doesn't mean that you're going to be at risk for being hospitalized. And as a matter of fact, the vaccine, and as long as you have a requisite amount of antibodies, it will prevent the virus from replicating in your body, which can lead to not only your health decline, but then the ability for you to spread it to others. And so we are going to have a number of people, and even in the clinical trials, 5% of people still developed infection and still had problems. So we know that there were going to be a small number of people that had breakthrough infection, but the overwhelming majority of people will remain protected, and we just have to now manage that small 5 to 7% of people that may have breakthrough infections and disease.
All right, thank you for illuminating that for us. Mr. Shirachman, we actually have some misinformation happening in our chat that we hope you can address. There's a reference to, it's either BI or BL.com, which tells the community not to be vaccinated and how it doesn't make any difference if you're not. Can you help correct the record on that?
Yeah, I want to say two things here. Is that I speak to a lot of groups, and when I talk to groups, I say, raise your hand if you've shared false or misleading information. Not a lot of people raise their hand, even though most of us probably have in our lives. But then I ask, do you know someone who has shared false or misleading information? And most everyone raises their hand saying, yep, I know someone in my feed who falls for hoaxes, falls for tricks. So first of all, this is clearly a trick. And second, I think what's important is how do we have conversations with people we know who are prone to fall for false information, disinformation, misinformation. The worst thing we can do is say, hey, David, you're wrong. You're an idiot. How could you believe that? People obviously never react well to being told they're false. They shared false information. We've talked to, actually, we had a conversation last month with someone whose job it is to get people out of cults. So people who are in cults, how do you break people free from those really deep-rooted beliefs that are false or harmful? And the answer is always, one, it needs to be personal. And two, we need to go on an investigation together So anytime you see someone online who's sharing false information, rather than say, you're false, you're wrong, the question I would ask or pose is, where did you get this information from? Let's research it together. Why do you believe that? Let them go on the journey with you to try to figure out the truth of the matter. So you're never going to convince, and there is plenty of research that suggests this. It is very hard. It will be very hard for you as a layperson to convince someone who thought the vaccines were unsafe to make them safe. You know, it's very difficult to say someone who's, I'm not getting the vaccine, to get them to say all of a sudden, oh, no, I'm going to take the vaccine. But what you can do is you can try to pick at, essentially, or build a better foundation of trusted information so that if they are skeptical, they're at least skeptical coming from a place of facts. I talk about this all the time. We have what we call our beliefs and we have our facts. And all we want to do in our job is to get people to have a shared set of facts and let them use those facts to believe whatever they want. Right. But what happens too often is we start with our beliefs. The vaccine isn't safe. And then we go in search of facts. And the internet will always provide us facts that support our conclusion, right? If you Google vaccine causes death, you will find lots of articles that might look real or safe or smart. But we're not starting from the same place of facts because we're falling back to our beliefs. So I would say have good discussions with the people you know. Personal interventions are always better, and go on a factual investigation together rather than saying you're wrong, you're false.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but your MediaWise project helps people to sift through what is fact and what is fiction. Is that right?
Yeah, that's totally true. I'll give you 3 real easy questions. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, 3 real simple questions. The first is, who is the source of the evidence? Whatever you see something online, who is the person sharing it? Is it someone you know and you kind of trust them, or is it someone you don't know and you don't know anything about them? Question 2, what is their evidence? So any good article, think about a medical journal article. A medical journal article will have pages of footnotes that cite lots of other research. So as anyone who's reading it can kind of follow along with the author exactly how they came to their conclusion, right? If you're reading an article that has no evidence, no links, no one else to kind of cite as a source, you should be more skeptical about it. And then the third question is, what do other sources say? So basically a 30-second Google search to say, are other people reporting this same thing about microchips and vaccines? What are other sources saying? If you answer those 3 questions, which honestly take 90 seconds to 2 minutes to do, you're going to understand very clearly whether or not you should trust something pretty quickly, and it's like 95% effective. Because those 3 questions get at the fundamental issues about what we see online. But we all know this, we don't take those 90 seconds. If we see something online that we like, we hit share, we hit retweet. We don't think about it the same way we would do if we were writing it down on a piece of paper or calling our friends up to tell them about it. And we need to kind of train our brains a little differently to just act a little more skeptically of what we see online.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then I'll wrap up by giving each of you a few minutes to tell us how folks can get involved with your projects if they so choose. Dr. Sneed, there are some questions in the chat about hesitancy within groups of individuals with disabilities and potential side effects. I'm curious if you can react to that one.
Absolutely. The number one thing I tell people all the time, and I know people don't have the microbiological background of me and my colleagues here, I understand that, but there is nothing, absolutely nothing about any of the current vaccines that are more dangerous than the actual virus. And we have to acknowledge that. That's number one. There's nothing more dangerous about the vaccines than capturing the virus. You know, people kind of felt that, well, you know, the virus is natural and I'm going to let my natural immunity take over. Well, no, this current virus right now, it has been stealthy in a way that it will overwhelm your natural immunity long before you have an opportunity to really fight back against it for a large number of people. Not everybody, but a large number. That's number one. Number two, I think making sure that we understand that if I think it will be a much different conversation, and I hate hypotheticals, I really do, because you know you can always create a very convenient hypothetical, as Mr. Sharon has already talked about. But if indeed we were talking about something that was inducing a cancer in a large number of people, okay, if the virus were now leading to widespread cancer among people, I don't think we'd even be having this discussion. I think people would be running out trying to make sure that they got whatever cure from the potential cancer they could get, because we have a large familiarity with cancer. We have not had a long time familiarity with the virus.
Right.
But the impact of this particular virus can be just as acute and just as damaging as a cancer can, and in some cases even more so because of how quickly it can overwhelm an individual versus, you know, many times a cancer will take months and even years to lead to a very bad outcome. So I think that's the things I would encourage people to really understand, David. Really, there's nothing more dangerous than this particular virus, and we also have to acknowledge that this virus and the variants are learning the human body at a very fast rate right now.
Right.
And that concerns me because over a 5-year period, we're probably going to have another pandemic. It may not be a coronavirus, but we're probably going to encounter one. So we need to learn how to protect ourselves now.
Right. Well, thank you for that very clear message that there's nothing more dangerous than the virus. That concludes our question and answer session, and I just want to give each of you the space to tell us how folks can get involved with your respective projects. Mr. Shirachman, can you tell us how folks would get involved with MediaWise or the Truth Squad?
Yeah, I appreciate that, David. And thanks for this panel's very interesting discussion. So the one thing I would say, if anyone goes to pointer.org/MediaWise, we actually have a free fact-checking course that is available for anyone. It takes about 2 hours, and you'll basically, in those 2 hours, you'll learn some of the tips and tricks that fact-checkers like me and my team use every day to help sort out fact from fiction. It will make you a much better, savvier internet consumer, and it'll help you kind of think critically about what you see online, right? What we try to do is take very complicated topics and boil them down into very digestible, easy to understand ways. One of the things that we've learned time and time again, and the coronavirus is a great example, is that people, it is tougher, it is always more challenging for people dealing with things they cannot see. They cannot see this virus. And so they don't know if a mask really works, because how do they know? How would they know, right? And so we need to work together as a society to help build trust and think more critically. For those who want to see our catalog of 800 fact checks, you can go to politifact.com/coronavirus. The website is free and available to all. You can sign up for, we have 2 email newsletters that one delivers every morning with our latest. One comes weekly if you like not spamming your inbox. And then lastly, I'll simply say, over the past year, we have spent a lot of time working on creating a YouTube channel so that people who are not into reading 1,000-word articles can kind of get the same critical, useful information through a 3-minute video that we think is pretty engaging and interesting. And so that's youtube.com/Politifact. So check us out. And the last thing I would say is, anyone who sees something fishy online, please email us, because we want to check it out. If it's something you see that you're not sure about, you could be sure that that's the same reaction hundreds or thousands of Americans have. So you can email us at truthometer@politifact.com, and we'll be happy to fact check anything that you send our way. So thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to staying connected.
Great, thank you for being here, Mr. Shirachman. Dr. Sneed, if folks want to get tap into the resources of We Care, can they schedule a talk? If so, how?
Well, the number one thing I encourage people to do, first of all, thank you all very much. I encourage people to really reach out to our community partner, Reach Up Incorporated.
Okay.
I think you can get to them by reachupincorporated.org. We kind of work with them. Again, to build trust with the community, we have to work with the community, and they are our community partner.
Right.
And so, we encourage that to be a starting point, number one. And then number two, again, I think one of the things I would really encourage people to know is the fact that, people keep questioning, well, it's not FDA approved. Well, we need to change the language of how we're even talking about that, because the moment it got the emergency use authorization, that was a provisional approval by the FDA and the CDC. And so the full approval we are expecting to come a little bit later on this summer or early fall. But all the data is in, and it's showing to be very safe and effective for the overwhelming majority of people. And so this will be the kind of information that we begin to share now as part of our We Care and Reach Up Incorporated outreach, helping people understand more of the process. And then number two, how to get engaged in the process earlier on through clinical research and involvement and community education, more so than getting all the information from the sites that Mr. Shirachman just mentioned. And we can have a more critical and more productive dialogue with the community.
Great. Dr. Sneed, Mr. Shirachman, thank you both for being here. Audience, thank you for taking time out to sit with us through this hour. If you'd like to join future Bishop Center events, please fill out the quick form that's in the chat. We will be sending some of the references and links to the resources that Dr. Sneed and Mr. Shirachman talked about. So thank you for your time. Have a great weekend.